The Blackwood Ranch stretched across 10,000 acres of prime Texas hill country, where money talked louder than gunshots, and Eleanor Blackwood's word was law. But there was one thing even her fortune couldn't control: the coal-black stallion that had trampled her husband to death 3 months ago. Every ranch hand who'd tried to break that devil horse ended up in the hospital or the grave. Then Jake Morgan rode into town. Weathered boots, calloused hands, and eyes that had seen too much death. He was just another drifter looking for work, or so everyone thought. When Eleanor offered $1,000 to anyone who could tame her late husband's killer, Jake stepped forward. What happened in that corral defied everything the ranch hands knew about horses and men. The stallion didn't buck, didn't rear. The moment Jake's hand touched its neck, the wild beast became gentle as a lamb. The silence that followed was deafening. Because Jake Morgan wasn't just any cowboy, and that horse held a secret that powerful men had killed to protect. But why could Jake do what no one else could? Eleanor Blackwood stood frozen at the corral fence, her black dress billowing in the hot Texas wind. Behind her, a dozen ranch hands held their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of hooves and fury. But it never came. Jake's weathered hand rested against the stallion's muscular neck, and the animal that had terrorized the ranch for months stood perfectly still, its dark eyes calm for the first time since the day it had crushed Charles Blackwood beneath its hooves. "I'll be damned," whispered Tex Martinez, the ranch foreman who'd hired Jake that morning. Tex had seen Bronkbusters work magic before, but this was something else entirely. This was impossible. Jake's lips moved slightly, words too quiet for anyone else to hear. The stallion's ears twitched forward, as if listening to an old friend. Then, incredibly, the horse lowered its massive head and nuzzled Jake's shoulder. Eleanor's grip tightened on the fence rail until her knuckles turned white. She'd watched this same horse rear up and strike down 3 experienced cowboys. She'd seen it charge the fence when anyone so much as approached. Yet here was this stranger, this nobody who'd ridden in on a dusty mare with nothing but a bedroll and a battered hat, standing in the corral like he owned the place. "How?" she whispered, but her voice carried in the stillness. Jake turned toward her, and she caught something in those steel-gray eyes. Recognition? Guilt? Before she could be sure, he looked away and began walking the stallion in slow circles around the corral. The horse followed obediently, like a well-trained dog. From the main house, Eleanor noticed movement at one of the upstairs windows. Samuel Garrett, her late husband's business partner, stood watching from the study. Even at this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders. He'd been against offering the reward, claiming the horse should simply be put down. Now she wondered why. "What's the horse's name?" Jake called out, his voice rough from years of dust and whiskey. "Midnight," Eleanor replied. "Charles named him that." Jake nodded slowly. "Midnight," he repeated, and the stallion's ears perked up again. There was something in the way Jake said it, a familiarity that made Eleanor's stomach tighten with unease. The crowd of ranch hands began to murmur among themselves. Some crossed themselves, others shook their heads in disbelief. Cookie, the oldest hand on the ranch, spat into the dirt and muttered something about black magic. But Eleanor wasn't thinking about magic. She was thinking about the way Jake had handled himself when Tex brought him to the house that morning. How he'd known to ask for her instead of the foreman. How his eyes had lingered on the portrait of Charles in the front hallway. How he'd accepted the job before even asking about pay. And now this impossible taming of the animal that had haunted her nightmares for 3 months. Jake led Midnight to the center of the corral and stood beside him, one hand still resting on the horse's neck. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air, "this horse didn't kill your husband because he was wild or mean. He killed him because someone trained him to." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Around her, the murmur of voices died completely. "That's impossible," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. Charles had been an experienced horseman. He'd known Midnight since the stallion was a colt. For the horse to turn on him so suddenly, so violently. Jake's eyes found hers across the corral. "Someone gave this horse a command that night, ma'am." Someone who knew exactly what would happen when your husband entered that corral alone. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The question is, who wanted Charles Blackwood dead badly enough to turn his own horse into a weapon? The morning sun cast long shadows across the Circle M ranch as Ezra Blackwood approached the corral, his boots crunching softly on the frost-hardened ground. Word of the stranger's unusual demonstration with Tempest had spread through the bunkhouse like wildfire, and now a small crowd had gathered to watch whatever might unfold next. Catherine Morrison stood at the fence rail, her dark hair pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat, watching the black stallion pace restlessly in the enclosure. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with questions about what she'd witnessed. No man had ever calmed Tempest. Not her late husband Thomas, not the best horse trainers money could hire, and certainly not any of the ranch hands who'd tried and failed over the past 3 years. "Ma'am," Ezra touched the brim of his hat as he approached. "With your permission, I'd like to spend some more time with your horse." Catherine studied his weathered face, noting the calm confidence in his green eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, I'll be frank. What I saw yesterday defies explanation. That animal has injured good men, destroyed property, and cost me more in veterinary bills than some ranchers make in a year. How is it possible that you simply touched him and he became docile as a lamb?" Ezra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd learned long ago that the truth about his abilities only brought suspicion and fear. "Some horses just need the right approach, ma'am. I've always had a way with difficult animals. And some men have a way with avoiding direct answers." Catherine's tone was pointed but not unkind. "Nevertheless, if you can truly help Tempest, I'm willing to let you try." As Ezra entered the corral, Tempest's ears pricked forward, and the stallion moved toward him with surprising eagerness. The watching ranch hands murmured among themselves, still unable to believe what they were seeing. When Ezra placed his hand on the horse's neck, that familiar jolt of connection flowed between them, but this time something else came through. Images, emotions, memories that belonged neither to him nor the stallion. Flashes of Thomas Morrison filled Ezra's mind, the wealthy rancher riding hard across moonlit fields, his face tight with fear. Then came glimpses of underground chambers, wooden crates marked with strange symbols, and men in expensive suits speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Through it all, Tempest had been there, witnessing everything with the keen intelligence that marked him as far more than an ordinary horse. Ezra's hand jerked back as if burned. The stallion whinnied softly, pressing his muzzle against Ezra's shoulder, a gesture that seemed almost pleading. "Everything all right in there?" Catherine called, noting the sudden change in Ezra's posture. "Fine, ma'am." But Ezra's voice carried a strain that hadn't been there moments before. Whatever Thomas Morrison had been involved in, it had gotten him killed, and Tempest knew it. Over the next hour, Ezra worked with the stallion under Catherine's watchful eye, all while processing the disturbing images he'd received. The horse's seemingly wild behavior wasn't madness, it was protection. Tempest had been trying to keep people away from something, but what? When Catherine finally approached, the stallion didn't shy away as he normally would. Instead, he stood calmly, though his dark eyes remained alert and intelligent. "I've never seen anything like this," Catherine admitted, running her hand along Tempest's neck. "Thomas always said this horse was special, but after the accident—" She trailed off, pain flickering across her features. "Tell me about your husband's accident," Ezra said gently. Catherine's expression hardened. "Thomas was found dead 3 miles from here, thrown from his horse, or so the sheriff determined. But Tempest came back without a scratch, and Thomas was an excellent rider. He'd never fall from a horse, especially not his favorite. You don't think it was an accident?" "I think my husband discovered something he shouldn't have, and someone killed him for it." Her voice was steady, but Ezra could see the grief and anger she kept carefully controlled. "The problem is, I don't know what he found or who killed him. The sheriff closed the case after a week, said there was no evidence of foul play." Ezra studied her face, seeing strength beneath the sorrow. Catherine Morrison was no helpless widow. She was a woman seeking justice for her murdered husband, and somehow the horse she couldn't control held the key to everything. Mrs. Morrison, Ezra said carefully, if I told you I might be able to help you find the truth about your husband's death, would you be willing to trust me? I'm not involved, Ezra said firmly, but I might be the only person who can get the answers you need. He glanced at Tempest, who was watching their exchange with an almost human understanding. Your horse wants to tell you what happened that night. The question is whether you're prepared to hear it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the corral as Jake approached Tempest with deliberate steps. The stallion stood motionless, black coat gleaming like polished obsidian, but his eyes tracked every movement with an intelligence that made Jake's skin crawl. Something had changed since yesterday. The horse seemed to be waiting for him. Catherine watched from the porch, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She'd barely slept, haunted by fragments of dreams that felt more like memories. Dreams of her husband's final days, of hushed conversations she'd thought she'd forgotten, of midnight visitors who spoke in urgent whispers about things that made Thomas pace the floors long after she'd pretended to fall asleep. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, extending his hand toward Tempest's muzzle. The moment his fingertips made contact with the velvety skin, the world exploded into sensation. Blood on leather reins, a man's scream cut short, the taste of fear thick as copper pennies. Jake jerked his hand back, staggering. But Tempest stepped forward, pressing his nose against Jake's palm, and suddenly the visions weren't random flashes. They were a story, unfolding with terrible clarity. Thomas Whitmore hadn't died of a weak heart. Jake saw it all now, the struggle in the study, the stranger with cold eyes and calloused hands, the way Thomas had clutched his chest, not from heart failure, but from the blade that slipped between his ribs quick as a whisper. The killer had been careful, professional, making it look like natural causes. But Tempest had been there, had seen everything through the study window. The horse's memories flooded through Jake like a dam bursting. He saw Thomas's final moments, saw him pressing something into a leather pouch and stumbling toward the stable, his life bleeding away with each step. Tempest had watched his master bury the pouch beneath the water trough, had guarded that spot ever since, his wildness a performance designed to keep everyone away from the truth hidden in the earth. "What the hell?" Jake spun to find Samuel Hayes emerging from behind the barn, his weathered face creased with suspicion. The foreman's hand rested casually on his gun belt, but his posture was anything but relaxed. "Just working with the horse," Jake said carefully, noting how Hayes's eyes darted between him and the water trough. "Funny thing about that horse," Hayes drawled, moving closer. "Been perfectly manageable for years, right up until Mr. Whitmore passed. Then he turned wild overnight, almost like he was protecting something." The air between them crackled with unspoken threats. Jake felt Tempest's muscles coil beneath his hand, the stallion sensing the danger just as keenly as he did. Through their connection, Jake caught another flash of memory. Hayes accepting a leather pouch from the same cold-eyed stranger, counting out coins with satisfied grunts. "Samuel!" Catherine's voice cut through the tension as she approached, but Jake noticed how she kept her distance from the foreman.
"I was hoping to speak with you about the missing cattle count."
Hayes's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing to worry about, Mrs. Whitmore. Just some paperwork confusion." But Jake could see the truth now, pieced together from Tempest's fragmented memories. Hayes had been selling cattle on the side, doctoring the books, skimming profits. When Thomas discovered the theft, he'd threatened to expose it all. That's when Hayes had contacted his old acquaintances from his less savory days before becoming foreman, men who solved problems with violence. "I'm sure it is," Catherine said evenly, though something in her tone suggested she suspected more than she was letting on. "Perhaps you could show me the records later today?" "Of course." Hayes touched his hat brim, but his gaze lingered on Jake with unmistakable menace. "Enjoy your horse training, Drifter. Hope you don't get in over your head." As Hayes walked away, Jake felt Tempest's urgency like a physical weight. The horse was trying to tell him something else, something important. More images flashed through their connection, the killer returning at night, searching the study frantically, Hayes helping him tear through Thomas's belongings. They were looking for something, the evidence Thomas had hidden. Jake understood now why Tempest had been so protective of the water trough. Whatever Thomas had buried there was dangerous enough to kill for, important enough that men were still searching. The horse had been standing guard for months, using his apparent wildness as camouflage, waiting for someone who could understand. "What did you see?" Catherine asked quietly, studying Jake's pale face. He met her eyes, seeing his own suspicions reflected there. She knew something was wrong, had probably known for months but couldn't prove it. "Your husband was a careful man, wasn't he? The type to keep insurance policies?" Her sharp intake of breath told him everything. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Tempest isn't protecting territory. He's protecting evidence." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky held only scattered clouds. As Jake looked toward the approaching storm, he wondered if they'd live long enough to uncover Thomas Whitmore's final secret, or if that secret would bury them all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pasture as Elena watched Jake work with Thunder from the kitchen window. 3 days had passed since the stallion's miraculous transformation, and still she couldn't reconcile what she'd witnessed. The horse that had terrorized every hand on the ranch now followed Jake like a devoted dog, responding to whispered commands and gentle touches that defied everything she understood about breaking horses. She'd tried to convince herself it was merely skilled horsemanship, but the doubts gnawed at her like winter wind through barn slats. No man, however talented, could achieve such results so quickly. Not with Thunder. Not with a horse that had put 2 experienced wranglers in the hospital and cost her more in veterinary bills than she cared to calculate. A knock at the door interrupted her brooding. Elena opened it to find Sheriff Morrison standing on her porch, his weathered face grave beneath the brim of his hat. "Morning, Elena. Mind if I come in? Got some questions need asking." Her stomach tightened, but she stepped aside. "Of course, Tom Coffee." "Much obliged." He settled into one of her kitchen chairs, accepting the steaming cup with a nod. "Heard you got yourself a new hand. Man named Jake Collins." "That's right. He's been a godsend with the horses." She kept her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. "Why do you ask?" Morrison pulled a worn photograph from his shirt pocket and placed it on the table. The image showed a younger Jake, clean-shaven and wearing a Union cavalry uniform. "Got this telegram from a Marshal Hayes up in Colorado Territory. Seems he's been tracking a man fitting your Jake's description. Goes by several names, but they're all interested in talking to him about some unusual circumstances surrounding a horse ranch up there." Elena studied the photograph, her mouth dry. "Unusual how?" "Horses going from wild to tame overnight. Stock that shouldn't have survived a hard winter coming through fat and healthy. Some folks started whispering about unnatural influences." Morrison's eyes searched her face. "Then one night, the whole operation just vanished. Horses, hands, everything. Owner was found dead in his study, no signs of violence, but scared to death by the look of him." Through the window, Elena could see Jake moving among the horses in the far pasture. Even at this distance, she could tell they were calm, almost reverent in his presence. Thunder walked beside him, occasionally nuzzling his shoulder with an affection that still seemed impossible. "What exactly are you suggesting, Tom?" "I'm not suggesting anything, just sharing information." He finished his coffee and stood. "But I'd be careful if I were you. Sometimes when something seems too good to be true, there's a reason for that." After Morrison left, Elena found herself unable to concentrate on the day's tasks. She moved through the motions of running the ranch, but her thoughts kept returning to the sheriff's words. The photograph had definitely been Jake, though younger and bearing none of the weathered resignation she saw in him now. As evening approached, she made her way to the bunkhouse where Jake had taken up residence. She found him sitting on the steps, whittling a piece of wood into what looked like a horse figurine. His hands moved with the same gentle precision she'd observed with the animals. "Sheriff Morrison paid me a visit today," she said, settling beside him. Jake's hands stilled. "Did he now?" "Showed me a photograph. Asked about strange happenings with horses. She watched his profile in the fading light. Want to tell me what really happened in Colorado? For a long moment, the only sounds were the evening calls of birds and the distant snorting of horses in the pasture. When Jake finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. There was a rancher named Hutchins, good man, reminded me of your husband in some ways. He was struggling, about to lose everything to drought and wolves. Jake's knife resumed its careful work. I helped him, same as I'm helping you. For a while things were good, and then people started talking, asking questions. Hutchins got scared, started believing the whispers about deals with darkness. Jake set down the carving, his hands trembling slightly. One night he came at me with a shotgun, convinced I was some kind of demon. I tried to calm him, the way I do with spooked animals, but what, Jake? Sometimes the gift works too well. Sometimes it shows people things they can't handle seeing. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Hutchins saw what I really am, Elena, what this power really costs. His heart gave out from the shock of it. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. And the horses, the other hands, scattered to the wind when word got out. Horses won't stay where their protector isn't welcome. Jake finally met her eyes, and she saw something ancient and weary looking back at her. Question is, what are you going to do with what you know? The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as Elena watched Jake work with thunder from her kitchen window. 3 days had passed since that first miraculous moment, and still she could hardly believe what she'd witnessed. The stallion that had terrorized every hand who'd tried to break him now followed Jake around like a devoted dog. She poured herself another cup of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Sleep had been elusive since Jake's arrival, her mind churning with questions she didn't dare ask. The way Thunder had responded wasn't natural, couldn't be natural, yet here was the evidence, playing out before her eyes each morning. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Elena set down her cup and walked through the house, her boots echoing on the hardwood floors. Through the window, she spotted Sheriff Morrison's familiar silhouette, his badge catching the early light. Morning. Elena Morrison tipped his hat as she opened the door. Mind if I come in? Of course. She stepped aside, noting the serious expression on his weathered face. Coffee? That'd be appreciated. Morrison followed her to the kitchen, his spurs jingling softly. He positioned himself where he could see out the window to the corral. That's quite a sight out there. Elena poured him a cup, her movements careful and measured. Jake has a way with horses. So I hear. Morrison accepted the coffee but didn't drink. Funny thing, though, been sheriff in these parts for near 20 years, and I ain't never seen anything quite like it. A chill ran down Elena's spine. What do you mean? Well, word travels fast in a small town. Folks are talking about your new hand. Some say what he did with that stallion ain't normal. Morrison's pale blue eyes studied her face. Course, there's always been talk about strange happenings around these parts. Old stories mostly. Indian legends about men who could speak to animals, touch them and calm their wildest spirits. Elena forced herself to remain calm. People love their stories, Sheriff. That they do. Morrison finally took a sip of his coffee. But here's the thing that's got me curious. Yesterday, I received a telegram from a town about 200 miles north of here. Seems they had a drifter pass through recently. Man matching your Jake's description. Left quite an impression, apparently. The coffee cup felt suddenly heavy in Elena's hands. Oh. Stopped a stampede, they say. Bunch of cattle spooked by lightning, heading straight for the main street. This fella just walked out in front of them, raised his hands, and the whole herd came to a dead stop. Morrison's eyes never left her face. Saved the town, but folks started asking questions he didn't seem inclined to answer. Through the window, Elena could see Jake running his hand along Thunder's neck, the stallion standing perfectly still, almost entranced. Sheriff, what exactly are you suggesting? I ain't suggesting nothing, Elena. Just sharing information. Morrison set his cup on the counter. But I got a job to do, and part of that job is keeping track of unusual folks passing through my territory. Your Jake seems to be the unusual sort. He's a good man. He's helped me more in 3 days than your husband did in 3 years?" The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She stared at Morrison, anger flaring in her chest. "That's uncalled for, Sheriff." Morrison held up a hand. "You're right, and I apologize. But Elena, you need to understand, there are people in this territory who don't take kindly to anything they can't explain. And what's happening out there in your corral, well, it's going to draw attention you might not want." As if summoned by their conversation, Jake appeared at the kitchen door. Elena hadn't heard him approach, and she wondered how long he'd been listening. His dark eyes moved between her and Morrison, reading the tension in the room. "Sheriff." Jake's voice was neutral, but Elena caught the wariness beneath. "Jake, isn't it?" Morrison turned, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. "Been wanting to meet you properly. Folks in town are mighty impressed with your horse skills. Just doing my job." "Uh-huh." Morrison studied Jake for a long moment. "Mind me asking where you learned your trade?" "Here and there. Been around horses all my life." "I'll bet you have." Morrison moved toward the door. "Well, I should be getting back to town. Elena, you need anything, you know where to find me." He paused at the threshold, looking back at Jake. "Enjoy your stay, son. Hope it's a peaceful one." After the sheriff left, Elena and Jake stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Outside, thunder whinnied softly, as if sensing the change in atmosphere. "Elena," Jake began, but she cut him off. "Don't." She turned away from him. "Whatever you're about to say, just not yet. I'm not ready." But even as she spoke the words, Elena knew that ready or not, the truth was coming. And when it arrived, everything would change. The telegram arrived with the morning dust, carried by a rider whose horse was lathered white with sweat. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as Jack emerged from the stable, his shirt already dark with perspiration despite the early hour. The rider dismounted, handed over the yellow paper, and was gone before the echo of hoofbeats faded. Jack's face went stone cold as he read. Without a word, he folded the telegram and walked toward the house, his spurs ringing against the porch boards like a funeral bell. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, though the look in his eyes already told her everything she needed to know. "Sheriff's been asking questions in Amarillo. About me." Jack's voice was steady, but she caught the slight tremor underneath. "Someone's been feeding him stories." Eleanor's blood chilled. "What kind of stories?" "The kind that get a man hanged." Jack moved to the window, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting riders to appear at any moment. There was trouble up north. A man died. They never found who did it, but now someone's claiming they can place me there. The weight of his words settled between them like a physical presence. Eleanor had always known this moment would come. The past had a way of hunting down men like Jack Cartwright, especially when someone with money and influence decided to open old wounds. "Marcus," she whispered. Jack nodded grimly. "Has to be. He's got connections everywhere, probably figured if he couldn't run me off one way, he'd try another." Eleanor's mind raced. She'd underestimated her brother-in-law's reach, his willingness to destroy innocent lives to get what he wanted. But Jack wasn't entirely innocent, was he? The question she'd been avoiding finally clawed its way to the surface. "Jack," her voice was barely audible, "did you kill that man?" The silence stretched between them like a canyon. When Jack finally turned from the window, his eyes held a pain so deep it nearly broke her heart. "His name was Tom Brennan. He was a good man with a family." Jack's words came slowly, each one carefully weighed, but he was also dead when I found him. Shot in the back by rustlers who'd been hitting his spread for months. Eleanor's breath caught. "Then why?" "Because I rode with those rustlers once. Long time ago, before I knew what kind of men they really were." Jack's jaw tightened. "When I found Tom's body, I tried to track them down. But by the time the law arrived, all they saw was me standing over a dead rancher with my gun drawn and blood on my hands from checking if he was still alive. You ran. I ran. Figured I'd never get a fair trial with my reputation. Jack's laugh was bitter. Turns out I was probably right. Eleanor moved toward him, but a commotion outside stopped her cold. Through the window she could see dust rising on the eastern road, riders coming fast. Too many riders for a social call. "How long do we have?" she asked. Jack was already moving, checking his colt, grabbing his rifle from beside the door. "Not long enough. Eleanor, listen to me. When they get here, you tell them you hardly knew me, that I was just a drifter you hired for a few days' work." "Like hell I will." The fierceness in her voice surprised them both. "This is my ranch, and you're under my protection. Your protection won't stop a lynch mob. Then we'll make our stand together." The riders were closer now. She could make out Sheriff Briggs leading the group, with Marcus riding beside him like an avenging angel. Behind them came at least a dozen men she didn't recognize, their faces hard and purposeful. Jack moved to the back door. "I won't bring this trouble down on you, Eleanor. You've got Tommy to think about. And what about Diablo? What happens to him when Marcus owns this place?" Jack paused, his hand on the doorframe. They both knew the answer. Marcus would have the stallion destroyed out of spite, erasing the last trace of both Jack's presence and her husband's memory. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, accompanied now by the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather. Eleanor made her choice. "The north pasture," she said quickly. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles up the canyon. Food, water, ammunition. You can hole up there while I try to sort this out. Eleanor, go." She pushed him toward the door. "Take Diablo. If anyone can outrun them across this country, it's him." Jack hesitated for one heartbeat, then leaned down and kissed her, quick, desperate, full of everything they couldn't say. "I'll come back for you. You'd better." He was gone then, slipping out the back door like smoke. Eleanor straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and walked to the front porch to face whatever lies Marcus had brought with him. In the distance, she could hear Diablo's wild cry as Jack approached the corral. The real fight was just beginning. The stallion's eyes rolled white as Jacob approached, its massive frame trembling against the reinforced stall that had barely contained it for 3 days. Sweat darkened the animal's coat despite the cool morning air, and foam flecked its muzzle where it had been biting at the iron bars. "Easy, boy," Jacob murmured, extending his hand slowly. The moment his fingers brushed the horse's neck, the world exploded into fragments of memory and terror. Blood on marble floors. A man's scream cut short, Catherine's father stumbling backward, clutching his chest as poison coursed through his veins. And standing in the shadows, Thomas Whitmore, younger then, watching with cold satisfaction as his business partner died. Jacob jerked his hand back, gasping. The stallion's wild thrashing suddenly made perfect sense. The horse hadn't witnessed murder. It had been there when Catherine's father discovered the truth about his mines. The silver deposits everyone believed were played out were actually richer than ever, hidden by falsified assayer reports and doctored ledgers. "What did you see?" Catherine's voice came from behind him, tight with fear. He turned to find her standing in the stable doorway, Sheriff Martinez at her side. Both looked haggard, as if they'd been awake all night, which they probably had, given what they'd learned about the recent string of accidents befalling anyone who might have knowledge of the mine's true value. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack," Jacob said quietly. "And Whitmore's been systematically eliminating anyone who might expose what really lies beneath your land." Catherine's face went pale. "The surveyor who fell down the mine shaft last month." "Murdered." Sheriff Martinez stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "We found evidence in Whitmore's study after you two left last night. Correspondence with buyers back east, shipping manifests for silver that supposedly didn't exist." He paused, studying Jacob with sharp eyes. "Question is, how did you know to look for it?" The stallion snorted and pawed the ground, still agitated. Jacob could feel the animal's memories pressing at the edges of his consciousness, more fragments of that terrible night. Whitmore hadn't acted alone. He'd had help, someone who knew the house, someone Catherine trusted. "Where's Elena?" Jacob asked suddenly. Getting breakfast ready, I assume. Catherine frowned. Why? But Jacob was already moving, the stallion's frantic whinnying following him as he strode toward the main house. The memories were clearer now, and he could see the second figure in his mind, smaller, wearing a dark shawl, moving silently through the house while Whitmore confronted Catherine's father in his study. He found Elena in the kitchen, calmly packing supplies into a worn leather satchel. She didn't look up when he entered, just continued folding clothes with steady hands. Going somewhere? He asked. See, she replied simply. It is time. Catherine and Martinez appeared in the doorway behind him, and Elena finally raised her head. Her weathered face showed no surprise, only a deep weariness that seemed to age her another decade. Tia Elena? Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. Tell me it's not true. The older woman's shoulders sagged. Your father, he was going to sell the ranch. Move back east with all that silver money, take you away from here, from me. Her voice cracked. This place, this family, it was all I had left after my one died. I could not let him take you away. So you helped Whitmore poison him. Jacob's words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water. Catherine stepped backward, her hand pressed to her mouth. All this time you held me when I cried, you comforted me, because I love you like my own daughter. Elena's voice was fierce despite her tears. That was never a lie. Nothing else I did mattered except keeping you safe. And now? Martinez asked, his hand still near his weapon. Elena gestured toward the window, where dust clouds marked riders approaching fast. Thomas, he knows you found his papers. He is coming to finish what we started, but this time I will not help him. She pulled a small derringer from her apron pocket, checking the chambers with practiced ease. I have made enough mistakes. I will not make another. The thunder of hoofbeats grew closer, and Jacob felt the stallion's agitation spike even from this distance. The horse had been trying to warn them all along, carrying the weight of that terrible secret, driven wild by memories of betrayal and death. Outside, Whitmore's voice rang out across the yard, cold and commanding. Catherine, we need to talk. The barn felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah pressed herself against the rough wooden planks, listening to the whispered conversation drifting from Thunder's stall. She'd come early to check on the stallion, but voices had stopped her cold at the entrance. Told you to handle this weeks ago. The voice was unfamiliar, gravelly with age and cigarettes. The situation's more complicated than we anticipated. This second voice made her blood freeze. Deputy Morrison, the cowboy's not just some drifter. There's something different about him. Different how? A third voice now, younger but carrying an edge of violence that made Sarah's skin crawl. You saw what he did with the horse. That ain't natural. Morrison's boot scraped against the straw-covered floor. Old Miguel was right about what runs in bloodlines around here. Sarah's heart hammered so loud she was certain they'd hear it. She inched closer, straining to catch every word. Don't matter if he's got the devil's own touch, the gravelly voice continued. What matters is the land. That survey map shows exactly what we thought. Richest vein of silver this side of Colorado runs right under this property. Wilson's been patient, but his investors ain't gonna wait much longer. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Wilson, the businessman who'd been pressuring her to sell, the mysterious accidents plaguing neighboring ranchers, Morrison's convenient appearances whenever trouble struck. She won't sell, Morrison said, woman stubborn as her husband was. Then we make her sell, or make it so there's nothing left worth keeping. The younger voice carried casual cruelty. Fire's always been effective. And the cowboy? Eliminate the problem. Make it look like an accident. These drifters disappear all the time. Thunder's soft whinny echoed through the barn, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Sarah held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows as a figure moved past her hiding spot. In the dim light filtering through the gaps in the walls, she glimpsed the younger man, lean, with cold eyes and a gun worn low on his hip. Horse knows we're here, Morrison muttered. Animals always get spooked around. The barn door creaked open at the far end, and Sarah heard Jack's familiar whistle. Her chest tightened with terror. He was walking straight into their trap. "Well, well," the gravelly voice chuckled, "saves us the trouble of hunting him down." Sarah had seconds to act. She grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall and crept toward the back of the barn where a loose board provided an escape route. But as she moved, her boot caught a bucket, sending it clattering across the floor. "What was that?" The younger man's voice sharpened. "Check it out," Morrison ordered. Heavy footsteps headed in her direction. Sarah abandoned stealth and bolted for the loose board, squeezing through just as a hand grasped at where she'd been. She hit the ground running, circling toward the front of the barn. Inside, she heard Jack's voice, calm and unsuspecting. "Morning, Deputy. Early for you to be out here." "Just doing my rounds," Morrison replied, but Sarah caught the tension underneath. "Heard there might be trouble." She reached the front entrance and peered inside. Jack stood near Thunder's stall, his back to the three men who had positioned themselves strategically around the barn. The stallion was restless, sensing the danger that Jack hadn't yet recognized. "Jack!" she screamed, bursting through the doorway. "It's a trap!" Everything erupted into chaos. The younger man's hand flew to his gun, but Jack was already moving, diving behind a hay bale as the first shot splintered wood where his head had been. Thunder reared and screamed, his powerful hooves striking the stall door. Morrison drew his weapon, but Sarah was there with the pitchfork, driving the tines toward his gun hand. He cursed and twisted away, the shot going wide. The gravelly-voiced man, older than the others, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the barn, backed toward the door. "Kill them both," he snarled. "Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Jack rolled behind another stall as bullets chewed through the wooden planks. Thunder's fury was building to a crescendo, the stallion's supernatural rage feeding on the violence in the air. The stall door began to splinter under his assault. "Sarah, get down!" Jack shouted, but she was already moving, using her knowledge of every shadow and hiding spot in her own barn. The younger gunman advanced on Jack's position, confident and methodical, but he'd forgotten about Thunder. With a sound like breaking timber, the stallion's stall door exploded outward. 2,000 pounds of supernatural fury erupted into the barn, eyes rolling white with rage, hooves striking sparks from the packed earth floor. The gunman spun toward this new threat, and in that instant of distraction, Jack made his move. The real fight was just beginning, and the secret that had protected this land for generations was about to be revealed in all its terrible power. The dawn sky bled crimson across the horizon as Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching the shadows retreat from the pasture below. 3 days had passed since Jake's revelation about his gift, and the weight of that knowledge pressed against her chest like a physical thing. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through the implications of what he'd told her. A supernatural gift. The phrase felt foreign on her tongue, yet it explained everything. The way Thunder had calmed instantly at Jake's touch, how the other horses gravitated toward him, the almost mystical connection she'd witnessed between man and beast. Footsteps on the porch below drew her attention. Jake emerged from the bunkhouse, his hat pulled low against the morning chill. Even from her window she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved with purpose toward the stable. He'd been avoiding her since their conversation, taking his meals separately and finding excuses to work alone. Sarah dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. The kitchen felt cavernous in the pre-dawn quiet, but she busied herself making coffee, needing the familiar ritual to steady her nerves. The aroma filled the air just as the back door opened. "Thought you might want some," she said without turning around, hearing Jake's distinctive footfall on the wooden floor. "Much obliged." His voice carried a roughness that spoke of sleepless nights. "Sarah, about what I told you. We need to talk." She faced him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his jaw clenched as if bracing for a blow. "But not here. Too many ears." He nodded, understanding. The ranch hands would be stirring soon, and walls had a way of growing thin when secrets were involved. They walked in silence toward the old oak tree that stood sentinel over the family cemetery. Sarah's husband lay beneath the weathered headstone, along with his father and grandfather, 3 generations of men who'd fought to keep this land. The irony wasn't lost on her that she might lose it all to men who wanted to exploit the very gift that could save it. "Tell me about the others," she said once they were safely away from the house. "The ones who've been hunting you." Jake leaned against the oak's massive trunk, his fingers absently stroking the bark. "Started about 5 years ago. First it was just whispers, stories about a cowboy who could calm any horse. Then the stories grew bigger, stranger. Word spread to the wrong people." "What kind of people?" "Rich men who think they can own anything, including what God gave me." His voice hardened. "They tried buying me first. When that didn't work, they tried force. I've been running ever since." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "The men who came by yesterday, Crenshaw and his partner, they were asking about you." Jake's head snapped up. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, but they'll be back." She moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "Jake, there's something else. The banknote comes due in 2 weeks. If I can't pay it, they'll foreclose." "How much?" $3,000. The sum felt like a death sentence. "I've got maybe half that if I sell everything that isn't nailed down." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he spoke, his words carried a weight that made her heart skip. "There's a way. But it would mean using my gift in ways I swore I never would." "What do you mean?" "Horse racing. Big money races where wealthy men bet fortunes on bloodlines and training." He turned to face her fully. "With my gift, I could guarantee wins. But once I start down that path, they'll never let you stop," Sarah finished, understanding flooding through her. "And it wouldn't just be me at risk. Anyone connected to me becomes a target." His eyes searched her face. "Including you." The weight of the choice settled between them like a physical presence. Sarah thought of her husband's dreams, of the legacy he'd built with his own hands. She thought of the ranch hands who depended on this place for their livelihood, of the horses that called this pasture home. "There might be another way," she said slowly. "What if we brought them here, made them come to us on our terms?" "That's dangerous thinking, Sarah. These aren't men who play fair." "Neither are we." She surprised herself with the steel in her voice. "This is my land, Jake. My husband died protecting it, and I'll be damned if I let some greedy bastards steal it because they want to cage a gift that belongs to you alone." Jake studied her face in the growing light, and she saw something shift in his expression, surprise giving way to admiration, and beneath that, something warmer that made her pulse quicken. "You know what you're asking? I'm asking you to trust me." She reached out, her fingers finding his. "The way I'm trusting you." His hand closed around hers, warm and calloused and strong. "Then we'd better start planning." The crimson dawn broke over Thornfield Ranch as Jake pressed his palm against Midnight's trembling flank one final time. The stallion's memories flooded through him, years of standing guard, of keeping the ancient evil buried beneath the stable floor, of waiting for someone who could understand his burden. "It's time," Jake whispered to the horse, then turned to face the assembled group. Elena stood beside the gaping hole they'd torn in the stable floor, her face pale but resolute. Sheriff Morrison gripped his rifle, though they all knew bullets would be useless against what lay dormant below. Doc Henderson clutched his medical bag like a talisman, and even the ranch hands, who stayed loyal through the chaos, looked ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. "The binding spell is weakening," Elena said, consulting the leather-bound journal they'd found in her husband's secret study. Charles kept it contained for 20 years, but without someone to renew it. "The thing will wake up," Jake finished. He could feel it stirring in the depths, a malevolent presence that had slumbered since Elena's husband's death 6 months ago. And when it does, it won't stop with the ranch. They'd discovered the truth in Charles Thornfield's hidden papers. During a cattle drive decades ago, he'd stumbled upon something that should have remained buried. A creature from the old Apache legends, a skinwalker that fed on life force and left only desiccated husks in its wake. Charles had managed to trap it using a binding ritual he'd learned from a tribal medicine man, but the spell required constant renewal. "There's another way," Elena said quietly, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "A permanent binding, but it requires a life freely given." Jake nodded. He'd seen it in Midnight's memories, felt the weight of the horse's knowledge. Someone has to take Charles's place as the guardian. "No," Elena's voice cracked. "There has to be another solution. I won't lose you, not after everything we've found together." Jake moved to her side, his supernatural senses picking up the creature's increasing agitation below. They had minutes, perhaps less. "Elena, look at me." She turned, tears streaming down her face, and he cupped her cheeks gently. "I've been drifting my whole life, running from what I am, what I can do. But here, with you, I found something worth staying for." "Then stay," she whispered fiercely. "We'll find another way." A low rumble emanated from the pit, and the ground began to tremble. Midnight reared, his wild neighing echoing through the stable as supernatural fear rippled through every living thing on the ranch. "There is no other way," Jake said, pressing his forehead against hers. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let them turn this place into a shrine to my sacrifice. Live, Elena. Find happiness again." Before she could protest, Jake kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and regret into that final moment of contact. Then he pulled away and stepped toward the pit. "Jake, don't." Sheriff Morrison caught Elena's arm as she lunged forward. "Let him go, ma'am. It's what he wants to do." The rumbling intensified, and a putrid smell began seeping from the depths. Jake could feel the creature's ancient hunger, its rage at being contained for so long. He placed his hands on the ritual circle carved into the stable floor, feeling the old magic respond to his touch. "I offer my life freely." He spoke the words from the journal, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I bind myself to this place, to hold what must not be released." But something unexpected happened. Instead of draining his life away, the magic seemed to recognize something in him, some compatibility with the ancient forces at work. The binding settled into his bones, not as a death sentence, but as a transformation. The rumbling stopped. The putrid smell faded. Jake opened his eyes to find himself still standing, still breathing, but forever changed. He could feel the creature below, securely bound once more, and knew that as long as he remained on the ranch, it would stay that way. Elena broke free from the sheriff's grip and ran to him, her hands exploring his face as if to confirm he was real. "The magic," Doc Henderson breathed, studying the journal. It recognized him as kin to the old powers. "He's not dead. He's become the permanent guardian." Jake pulled Elena close, marveling at this unexpected reprieve. He was bound to the land now, could never leave Thornfield Ranch, but as Elena's arms encircled him and Midnight nuzzled his shoulder in approval, he realized he'd finally found exactly where he belonged. The sun climbed higher, painting the ranch in gold, and for the first time in years, true peace settled over the Thornfield spread.